Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business. Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to this edition of the Pest Geek podcast. I am Frank Hernandez, your Pest Geek. Hey, we're discussing all things pests, and we've got an exciting interview today, but I wanted to run some things by you before we got into the podcast. We got some exciting new stuff for you guys. The Pest Pro Local that we're launching, we have a group, Pest Pro Local Florida, plus Pest Pro Local Texas, and Pest Pro Local California. This is a group for you to join if you're in one of those states, and we're going to be publishing this, trying to make this available for people to go on there who are needing help, be able to ask questions. You can help them and then maybe get a lead from it. So that's one of the things that we're doing. Also, to complement that, in our YouTube and podcast, we're going to be doing a Pest Pro Local segment. So if you are a Pest Pro, anywhere in the world, and you would like to be on the podcast, that you're going to be either doing pest control, we're going to be doing a recording on Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. So we're opening up our normal interviews that we do for companies and people that are wanting to experts on some deal, but we're getting so much response from it that we need to open up another day of the week because we're pretty much booked almost till June right now on the podcast for interviews. So if you are a pest professional and you want to be on the show, if you've got an expertise that you want to talk about a specific pest problem in your area that is exclusive usually to your area, I want to talk to you. We want to promote you. We want to talk about it. We want to give you a video on our YouTube channel where we can promote you. You can get local business. We're working that angle right now. So just go ahead and go to pestgeekpodcast.com. Check the next available date, but we're going to open it up for Wednesdays. If you are a wildlife professional, contact Steven Van Tassel so he can do an interview for you because he's more versed on wildlife than I am. So if you're needing and you're wanting to promote yourself and be out there and talk about real issues, how you can help people, and you want to help people, go ahead and contact us. And we'll go ahead and get you on. Also, the Pest Geek Academy is still going. We're still recording. I think we're up to 9 classes right now that I've recorded. I usually have to do about 3 recordings on that because I make so many mistakes. But anyway, that's coming. If you want to help the podcast and you want to donate and you want to become a supporter of the podcast, patreon.com/pestgeekpodcast, or simply go to pestgeekpodcast.com. And there you can hit the donate button and go ahead and contribute. Hey, look, if it's $4 a month, if it's $1 a month, whatever you feel this podcast is worth, it would greatly help us. Also, if you've been thinking about, getting a 1-800 number or getting a 1-800-GOT-BUGS number or easy to remember like an 800-600-500, do me a favor. Give our friends at Ring Boost a call. They're the nation's largest provider of local and toll-free phone numbers. And we would definitely appreciate the support because we definitely do get a commission if you do buy. Right now, they're offering 15% off every service that they offer. So if you will go on there and put the promo code PEST15, go to ringboost.com/pest, hit the promo code PEST15, you're going to get 15% at checkout. Oh, I also want to give my buddy, the Critter Trapper, Jose Becerra, in Inglewood, California, the Critter Trapper. If you're looking for somebody to trap your critters in Inglewood, California, give him a call, 818-624-2051, crittertrapper.com, and you can email him at info@crittertrapper.com. That is Jose Becerra, the Critter Trapper. And now, on to our special guest.
Well, hi, everybody. Steven Van Tassel here, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife. We have a special guest here, Mr. Smith. It's Duff Smith. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes.
All right. Well, today we're going to talk about all things cats. Yes. house cats, feral cats, free-range cats, cats, the nemesis of many individuals out there. And of course, you have the cat mafia that are constantly trying to get more cats out onto the streets for whatever reason. We're going to talk about cats today. And so we're talking to Mr. Smith here out in the great state of Florida. So welcome to the Pest Geek Podcast.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, tell us a little about yourself out in the Pest Geek world.
Well, I did what I did with the cats on a volunteer basis, and then as a favor for a few friends. And doing it professionally would involve some flaming hoops where I live. I mean, a lot of people aren't cool with the idea of trapping cats or even taking them to the pound, where our animal control director lady makes some very professional decisions as to what to do with the cats.
Yeah.
And gets a lot of them adopted out, actually, but that's not good enough because she doesn't meet no-kill criteria. And she has a message on her main website explaining about responsible sheltering. And so having her as an animal control director was pretty critical. I don't know what I could have done without somebody who was, committed to being open intake at my local shelter.
And that's becoming rarer and rarer now in the U.S., isn't it? Where you have everything's gone, almost no-kill shelters, isn't it?
Yes, and the place where I live is Key Largo, Florida. It's the Florida Keys, and we have these island habitats with their incredibly diverse plant and animal composition. The species composition here is really very unique and important. It's all the way at the very southern end of the United States in a tropical habitat, and you just got to take care of those habitats and those ecosystems that are all the way out on the fringes of a continental ecosystem because, climate change or whatnot. I mean, if species have to colonize new areas because climate change is forcing them to, I mean, you don't want to get rid of the animal species and plant species that are all the way on the fringe of your continental ecosystem there that need to, yeah.
All right, so explain a little bit. So you've talked here about the need for protecting these species. So how does cat control or cat removal play into that?
Well, I learned a long time ago when I used to like to go looking for snakes and stuff, and I would have loved to find a skink where I grew up in the Mid-Hudson Valley in New York State. Mm-hmm. I came to figure out that everywhere you go hiking in the woods and you see people's cats going everywhere, you don't find anything. They pick the environment clean of all of its snakes, a lot of its native rodents, that things like the barred owls and stuff use for food. Okay. So it's cats are just they're appealing. They're appealing. I had 3 cats myself, but it was a very tough realization for me that that the animal that I cared about or said that I cared about, it brought home a garter snake one day, and that changed me. I came to realize, this was a mistake, trying to tell my parents whatever it took to tell them that I wanted to keep this cat, and I wanted to, I was going to take all this responsibility for the cat. And I used to be of the same mentality as a lot of the people that wound up making threats against me right here in Key Largo. So, it was a hard realization that cats, as appealing as they are just a force of extermination when you don't take complete responsibility for where it's going. There's a public health issue with it wherever it's going to the bathroom. They spread something like 40 diseases to people, and not super rare diseases either. I mean, common things like cat scratch and toxoplasmosis and toxicara, they infect the eyes, the toxicara, and
Well, let's explore that a little bit more. You talked a little bit about, so you're saying complete responsibility for the cat. What does that mean? Does that mean that someone needs to not own cats anymore? Does it mean that we need to eliminate all cats from society? Or what do you mean by that?
Well, the way I was keeping my cat is I was letting it outside. I was letting it outside. My stepmother protested that at first because she said it was going to kill her birds. And I said, no, it won't. I'll feed it, and it won't do that. And I just had it all worked out in my head where it was going to work out. And what I actually needed to do was keep it inside take very good care of it inside. And a catio would have been nice, somewhere where the cat could go outside but not be all the way outside where it's unrestrained. You know. And now the way I look at adopting a cat, I mean, it seems like a good thing to do, but there's some people out there that need to get the message that the world already has enough cats. And I feel like if I were to adopt a cat again, that I would just be subsidizing this situation where people think they can just pump out cat after cat, and it would stop me from actually adopting a cat right now, even though, like I said, I find them to be perfectly appealing animals. You know, they're great for entertainment and companionship, but they're not filling that role when they're running outside, going wherever.
Right. Okay. So you're advocating that people, if they want cats, need to keep them indoors or somehow restrained so they don't have what I would call free range cats, because whether it's feral or free range, it's still ravaging the wildlife.
It is, and some people think they're great rodent catchers or whatever, and the thing is they kill snakes also, and that's what I found out is like even your common garter snakes and black racers that a lot of people have in a lot of parts of the country, they eat rodents. They'll go and find a rodent nest with a bunch of babies in it and swallow it, and you never see it happen. But cats get loose on the landscape, they devour all the snakes. They go after snakes way harder than mice, and it's and for some reason, everywhere you see cats, I mean, you don't see a lack of rodents. The rodents are still there.
Yeah, the mythology is pretty strong there. So explain what some of the control, when you said you were involved in a control event down in Key Largo, I'm assuming, or somewhere in that vicinity. How did that go? How did it start? What was the process that you used?
I first noticed that there was this person who was the cat people's guru, and he was their main spokesman, and he would write editorials to the newspaper. And I saw him next to a grocery store surrounded by 60 cats. Just 60 cats just squirming all around him, their tails sticking straight up. Meow. It was like this cat blob that was around him, that just heaving mass, like breathes in and breathes out, going meow, meow. And it was so ghastly that that was the first thing I noticed. The second thing that happened was my mother had already been involved in trapping cats around her house because she liked birds.
Right.
And there were people on the next street. This guy who I saw at the grocery store lived on one block over to the north, and there was another guy living one block to the south. And it was the guy one block to the south I got in a conversation with one day, and he said something bad about my mother. And when I was talking to him face to face, and I led on to him, well, you know, that's my mother you're talking about. And he just went on about dropping my mother's name like he didn't hear me or he didn't care. At that point, I felt like saying something to him, but I didn't say what I felt like saying, and I just kept my silence. And I resolved, you know, myself in the future. Okay, I studied biology. I know this is a problem. I even might know how to solve it, and I'm not going to let on to anybody that I'm going to solve it. I'm going to make my plan, and I'm going to make a difference in this town. And I did. I didn't say what I felt like saying to that guy because I didn't want to tip him off, because I know how those people are. I mean, they consort with one another on how to get that person they don't like, run over the garbage cans in front of their house or whatever. And, you know, I knew I needed to make a plan. I was going to have some guts, you know.
Okay. So that was the situation. You had, obviously, a feral cat advocate in your community. So 60 cats, that is a staggering number of cats in one spot.
Just one spot. He had several.
Oh my gosh. And so now what was the process that you went through to start the control, or what happened? What was the process you went through?
I volunteered doing habitat restoration near a nearby public area that was under, you know, government jurisdiction. It was government property, and they had conservation work days where you could go and work on restoring the habitat, you know, removing debris. We had this endangered mammal. We got this endangered mammal here at Key Largo called the wood rat, and we did supplemental nesting structures. Yeah. Ralph DeGainer is the big conservation guy who is involved with conserving the wood rat, and I've actually met Ralph. I've had that honor, and and he actually told me some trapping techniques that he used on the refuge. Told me some
Nice.
techniques to use, like concealing the traps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so then so how many cats were ultimately removed during your trapping event?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I took a lot of them to the pound. I took
Mm-hmm.
probably around 30 cats to the pound myself.
Wow. Wow.
And but there were other people doing it too. And
Mm-hmm.
I decided I was going to be kind of the lightning rod for the cat people during all
Okay.
this. I was going to let them direct their anger at me, and I was going to get a camera in front of my house and possibly catch their antics on my camera. And they drove by my house a lot.
Mm-hmm.
They would do these little ride-bys, and I recorded them on my camera. They even did it in the middle of Hurricane Irma. And they were the only car that came down the street all day while I'm watching the trees just boom boom
Wow.
on camera, and he comes down the street with this one other guy who was a convicted felon, didn't even have a driver's license, wasn't supposed to be on the road, and they came down the road together. It was
Wow.
another guy who had accosted me over my views on the cats, and
Uh-huh.
so and there were no cops. There were no cops for like a week before that or a week after that,
Right.
and I thought I was going to be on my own fighting those guys, keeping them off my property, and that's all they did. Fortunately, on that
Wow.
occasion, they rolled by like they were planning something. Or
And so what was the rationale? So you became the lightning rod. So what exactly were you being interviewed by the newspaper? Did you find yourself on TV? Was it just online?
no,
Or,
no, the reporters didn't have a lot of interest in me. It would always be the conservation guy who did it for the refuge, Ralph DeGainer.
okay.
And I drew a lot of the attention of the rank and file cat people
Okay.
who, do their dirty deeds done dirt cheap or whatever to anybody, they don't like. And that way the people near the top of that heap, don't have to, admit
Right.
responsibility for some of the things the lower ranking people do who, have certain things going on with their personality that are pretty scary.
Yeah. And so
You know,
what do you think is the reason? I mean, why is the passion for this free range cat thing, why is it so intense? Have you had any thought about that?
my own thoughts are, what I read about toxoplasmosis and how it can change the brain of rats.
Mm-hmm.
And some have suggested, it's been hypothesized by experts, that
Yeah.
this toxoplasmosis protozoal parasite actually gets into the brains of humans and modifies their behavior too. And there's been studies that said people who are seropositive, who test positive for the antibodies in their blood for
Yeah.
toxoplasmosis, have a higher rate of mental illness like schizophrenia or
Mm-hmm.
obsessive
Mm-hmm.
compulsive disorder.
Yeah.
And I got to believe it after talking to a bunch of people that I knew could not possibly have avoided infection by this stuff because of their constant contact. I think the guy who fed next to the grocery store at one point was doing this technique that I heard about online where he was actually smearing, the cat feces on himself to try to get the feral cats less afraid to approach him or whatever.
Oh my gosh.
And this was how he got kicked out of the grocery store next to where he was feeding and was not allowed to go in there.
Oh my word.
Because
I have not
that
heard that.
that is that is what he smelled like. And I swear I remember reading on this one website about feral cats as I started to begin my research that somebody was advising you could smear it on yourself and the cats would be less afraid of you. And this is what I heard about this guy, is that
Oh my
he smelled
gosh.
like it. He smelled like it, and he was kicked out of a grocery store for smelling like that.
Okay, boys
So
and girls, we need to probably just do a little public service announcement here. Do not smear cat feces on your body.
yeah,
So and don't do that. Poo is bad. This is one of my one of my quotes that when I do my teaching. Poo is bad. Don't touch that. So, and cat poo is no different here. So, don't do this. Yeah, don't do this. This is not recommended. This is what someone was doing. All right, we want to make sure we don't get sued for this type of information. So, sorry for my interruption there. Right?
yeah,
Yeah,
really.
continue going. All right, so keep going.
Okay, so I set the traps in the woods. I set a bunch of traps, and I had to conceal the traps for sure.
Yeah.
Sometimes it gets rainy around here, and I had to put these like sheet metal covers over the tops of the traps, but then they were a little harder to conceal. The cats had more of a tendency to go in there when the traps were concealed, and of course, they were harder to see for the kind of people that I had to worry about taking my equipment. And I lost something like 12 traps, and new ones would be donated to me. I had to tell my friends where I was going, what I was doing. So there were other people who knew about what I was doing, and every time word got down the grapevine that I was missing some traps, new ones would just show up on my property. So people weren't going to let me run dry of traps. There were people that really wanted this done.
So let's talk about your traps. What did you have a particular favorite trap that you were using, and what size was it?
I had a variety of drop-down traps, like the typical Habitat style traps.
Two door or single door?
Both. I was using both, and the single door, the double doors would sometimes only one door would shut. So it's a matter of like you got to sandpaper the tarnish off of the moving parts that contact one another. It probably helps to wax them a little bit.
Yeah.
Try not to use a real aromatic type of oil or whatever, because I was very worried about smells. I was always wearing rubber gloves or just making sure my hands were clean and not sweaty every time I handled the parts. And before I left the trap, I'd put the scent of the food on my hands and then on the trap. But you were saying what type of traps, and the double doors, I would often open just one of the double doors, the one that's got the linkages directly to the tray.
Yeah.
The trip plate. And then there were some.
So those were the two-door. So just to bring our audience up to speed, those were the two-door, the old-fashioned two-door Havahart traps, gravity doors. So they closed by gravity, not spring-loaded. So did you use any spring-loaded doors?
Some of them might have been spring-loaded. I believe some of them did, or at least on the part that locks the trap, the part that pops out and locks the door in place. That definitely had the spring loading. And there was one double-doored trap that had. There was one design where the door came out it came down a lot quieter, and that was a real good one.
Guillotine door or a diagonal door?
Diagonal door.
Diagonal door. Okay. So you had a traditional a more recent spring-loaded door, probably 10 by 12 by 32 in size for that single door trap. Probably a 1079.
Yeah, mostly those. Some were slightly smaller, and the cats were slightly smaller a lot of the time. So, but the big ones could accommodate like the biggest tomcats too. So. I definitely prefer the bigger ones.
So when you were covering them, you covered them with a metal cover. And did you do anything to the floor of the trap to shield the mesh from their feet?
Yeah, I would throw leaves in there. I have used newspaper also at times.
All right.
But usually a lot of leaf litter, because that was part and parcel to concealing the trap, because the mesh on the bottom of the trap was just as big a tip-off as the mesh on the top. So usually a lot of leaves.
And what was your favorite bait?
My favorite bait, let's see. That was I usually used canned cat food, and I preferred to get a can of cat food that came in like a plastic can instead of a metal, because when you're carrying the cat out, the metal can just rattles around like a.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So a plastic. I was just in a store. I haven't noticed any plastic containers. What brand? Do you remember the brand?
Fancy Feast.
Fancy Feast is plastic. I did not know that. So I learned. Okay. Fancy Feast. Any particular meal of Fancy Feast, or just any Fancy Feast meal was working for you?
I grabbed a variety, but mostly the seafood and the chicken.
Okay, seafood and chicken. And did you chum them?
Food.
Did you chum them, or did you make them go all the way into the trap before they got some food?
I made them go all the way into the trap for the food, and then I would put a small pile of catnip in front of the trap oftentimes, because it they're attracted to the catnip and they eat that, and then they're a little less careful. It has whatever effect catnip has on the cats, and they're not as careful, once they've had a little bit of catnip. And then
so
sometimes I use catnip as the bait.
Was that oil form or powder form?
Dried, minced up powder.
Okay, the powder form. Okay, and how much were you putting down?
Like a teaspoonful.
Teaspoon?
Or maybe more if I was just trying to get the cat attracted to the trap. If I used it as the bait and put the catnip all the way in the back of the trap with nothing else, it was more like a tablespoon. I really, because I want them to go for it. And
now,
using it.
Did you leave the traps out several days before you began to set them, or did you set them and bait them immediately?
I would set them and bait them immediately almost every time, because letting them sit out there would make them a target. I mean, I felt there were people always looking for them. Yeah. I did, however, sometimes because the pound wasn't open on the weekends, sometimes I would leave the traps in place and jam a stick in there and then trigger the trap so that it was being held open by the sturdy stick near the top where the door was held open, so they could go in and out of the trap, maybe steal some bait all weekend long. And there was something else about that, but I made sure to trigger the trap so it was the stick keeping the door from slamming shut instead of the trap plate, the trip plate, and the stick, because that way if they go in there and try the trap out, they'll hit that trip plate and it'll make a noise and spook them out of there, and that'll make them less inclined to go in the trap. So that was one of the fine details I had to work out there.
I got you. So if you had to do it over again, because when I've, in terms of my publication, what I've suggested people do, and this, it's not just me, I guess, it's would be other people who have a lot more experience than even I do, would be that if possible, to pre-bait your traps, wire the doors open so the doors don't close, get them conditioned to moving into the traps, and do that for a little bit before you ultimately set. And then, of course, your situation was different because you were in a hostile environment rather than a controlled environment. And so your situation was a lot more difficult. But if you were in a controlled environment, would you have gone about this a little bit differently, like in terms of pre-baiting first and having lots of traps available and then set them all at once after several days, rather than having to, the kind of cloak and dagger approach that you had to take, which was quite stressful, of course. Would you have done that?
Yeah, I would have left the traps in place, and I would have gotten the cats used to feeding there. And then when the cats come out of the trap after eating, they probably sniff each other's face, kind of like rodents do, and try to sniff what each other's been eating. And I think that would have like a kind of social chain reaction that would be good between the cats, and I think that would help draw them into the traps, definitely.
How did things go legally? Many communities across the United States treat cats as a domestic animal, that even if the cat is truly feral. So let's define something for our audience here, and that is, you have owned cats that are free range, where the cat is going out, killing all the wildlife it can find, and then coming back to the house. That cat is owned and even cared for. It may have its shots, it may have a collar on. That's a free range cat. It's still killing stuff, but someone is actually owning that cat. Then you have a true feral cat, which is technically an unowned animal, but it's out ravaging the world. You may have people feeding this animal, but if the cat does something wrong, they claim it's not theirs. And if you do something to the cat, they claim it's theirs. So yes. Heads you win, tails you lose. So this is where, so you have to make sure that if you're going to be doing cat control, you find out what the status of cats are in your area, because typically cats are treated as domestic animals, and domestic animals are by definition owned. Even if they're not owned, they're owned. And so that means if you're going to go into cat control, you better make sure you get all your dots in a row, because if you have if someone's cat end up getting killed, and you thought it was feral and they claim it was theirs, you're going to have some liability involved because it's a property issue at that point. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Okay.
They tried all those tricks in the book. And the first time they called the cops on me for being in their woods, and they did. The cop was pretty cool. I mean, I explained to him that, yeah, it's public land that the cat guy doesn't own and I don't own it either. And,
Right.
but the way I see it, he's not sterilizing all his cats. So he's farming cat on land he doesn't own. And I'm going in there and I'm taking them to the pound because they're not sterilized.
Okay.
They kept, in their public statements, they would kept saying they believed in trap, neuter, release and that they were working with whatever local animal agency. And then they would name the wrong one that's not in our town. But
Oh.
they said they were working with them to get all the cats sterilized. And I would trap the cats and none of them would be sterilized. And,
Wow. Wow.
there was even a situation where, back to this first cop I had to deal with though, because when he spoke to the guy who called the cops on me, and this is the guy next to the grocery store who at one time smeared that stuff, but he told the guy after speaking to him first, he said, you don't own the cats. These are not your property. You don't have a property claim to these cats because they're out living in the woods. They're nobody's cats. And
Okay.
and that's how the cop looked at it, and that was fortunate for me because
Yes.
after all, there's limits on how many cats you're supposed to have, and
Right.
there's laws that say they can't trespass. There's even a leash law in this town, but then there's other language in our municipal code that negates that leash law because
Really? Oh, so you have
yeah,
a contradiction. Okay, that's a problem.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh
That's
yeah,
what ultimately you want a community where cats have to be restrained. And so then the process would be if you capture a cat, then you would contact your animal control officer, and the animal control officer would remove the cat, and then the animal control officer would be responsible for finding the owner. So that's ideally what you'd want to do if your community's like that. So I would certainly encourage all Pest Geek podcast listeners, if you're getting involved in cat control, make sure you get all your crossed signatures and find out. And I would certainly suggest that you don't personally kill any cats. Ideally, you want to bring those cats to animal control and hand that property over to them. And you got to find out all that in advance before you start controlling. So some communities you would be allowed to kill them. Most would treat them as domestic species. So you got some research, and then of course you may get false information from people that just will hate what you're doing. So make sure you find the actual rules and find out. Sometimes you can get the health department to give you a demand to have cats removed. I had one job that I did for a company where the health department actually ordered the cats to be removed. That's that's your get out of jail free card right there. When you have health department orders. So do your due diligence, everybody, and look into this.
yeah.
So now that this is done, would you do it again?
I would love to do it again. Yeah, I would. It's like this. With this pandemic shutdown and everything, I'm under some pressure as soon as as soon as everybody's allowed to move around and get a job again. To go out and get some money. Although, I could look into starting possibly a vertebrate pest control service in my town. I could look into that. I could talk to the lady from animal control and ask her how that would go. I can tell you over the years, some of the things, sometimes she acted a little bit like a TNR kind of animal control agency where she gave the cats back to the people who were doing these colony feedings.
Yeah.
And the one good thing, though, even when it seemed like I was spinning my wheels with all that, sometimes I got the cat people caught in a lie. And because I treated the cats so well every time I caught them and took them out of the woods and covered the traps before I moved them and kept down their stress level,
Right.
I was able to catch the same cat more than once. And
Wow, that's pretty good.
So I thought when I turned the cat in, catching the same cat more than once, that I thought, the animal control lady was playing balls with the TNR people and just letting them do TNR and letting them let the cats loose again. But when I brought the cats back to the shelter, it would turn out that they weren't supposed to re-release the cat into the same woods, and they got in a lot of trouble, and she stopped dealing with them as a result of my bringing her the same cat more than once. So even when it felt like I was spinning my wheels, I was actually still doing some good. That
Excellent.
was yeah.
So you don't have any vertebrate control in your community. So my understanding of Florida law is that you can talk to your wildlife agency down there and get your permit to do wildlife control. So because it's more to the world than just cats, right? You have raccoons and skunks and squirrels and mice, all different vertebrates, and you may want to look into getting your pest control permit as well, which allows you to use pesticides. So there are definitely ways to do that down there. So you removed 30 cats. How did you protect yourself from getting scratched or bitten while you were picking these traps up? You just kept them all covered before you began to move them, so the cat couldn't reach through the cage and scratch you?
Yeah, some of them were very mean, and the handles were all working on the traps, and if they weren't, I would have come up with a new one right away before trapping with it. You can grab the trap at one end where the diagonal door keeps the animal away from your hand, and you can grip it there. You can grip it from the top handle, and sometimes you got to work the top handle with a stick to get it up high enough off the trap that you can grab it with your hand.
Right.
Or actually, there's a plate there. Yeah, there's
Mm-hmm.
a plate, so you can grab that, and the plate will protect your hand right where the handle is in the top center. So and then I held it just away from my body, and that was a discipline, remembering to hold the trap at least a few inches from my body, because there's holes in the trap big enough for them to actually reach out and take a swipe. And I've come pretty close to getting that cat scratch fever, just like that one musician sang about,
Yes.
And
yeah.
And something like 20.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say like 24% or something of cat bites. Some crazy double-digit percent of cat bites require surgery, for crying out loud.
The infection rate's really high because they have such fine teeth, and the flora in their mouth has so many bacteria in it. So it's like getting an injection of bacteria into deep tissue, and so it's a real problem out there. So our professionals, our listeners, are certainly know a lot about this stuff, and so you can find that if you were getting better equipment, you would find the safety factor for you would go up enormously. So, but you were kind of making do with what you had available. So one of the things you'd want to look for is getting those traps that are 1/2 inch by 1 inch mesh, which are professional level traps. So you have retail level traps and professional level traps. So retail traps tend to have a 1 by 1 inch mesh, and that allows the animal to get their foot through, right? So if you get 1/2 inch by 1 inch mesh, it's a lot heavier because you're almost doubling the amount of wire in the trap, but you don't have the ability. It's very difficult for most animals to get their foot through that. And certainly a cat would be very hard to get through that. So we've learned this from raccoons. So, because raccoons will reach through 1 by 1 inch mesh traps, and they'll trash anything they can find within 6 inches of the trap, which is really a problem when you set the trap on the roof of a house. They will actually deshingle it within 6 inches of that trap. They will trash it. The one guy knew he had a trap set near a garden hose, and he forgot he was that close, and the raccoon the next day had the entire 50-foot line of garden hose inside the trap. So this is one of the advantages. But since you were covering is a way. It's sort of the poor man's way of improving that trap, because you basically stop the animal from reaching through by putting a cover on it. So a lot of us will use cloth covers rather than metal covers, and that way they're easier to carry. You can stack them up. They're cheap, and just get some denim and then serge stitch the outside of it. And so you just simply wrap it over the top of the trap and just put some rocks or dirt on top of it so it doesn't blow away. And it's a very inexpensive way of covering. But metal works too if you can afford it. So, as you guys had. So it's pretty neat. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the diseases you talked about. You talked about cat scratch fever. You talked about toxoplasmosis. Any others that people should really be concerned with?
Yeah, there's I'm trying to think off the top of my head here, but there's like out west, plague is endemic
Right.
to some of the western states, and the cats. If you read the articles of those unfortunate people who got these rare plague infections, I found that it's more often than not their cat that spread it to them, and
Right.
the cats even can develop the pneumonic form of plague, where it would have been bubonic if you'd gotten it from a flea bite. But
Right. Right.
cats, they cough up bloody sputum and breathe in and out with bloody sputum on their mouth and nose, and that's how people are getting pneumonic plague, which is way more dangerous and contagious, often from a cat.
I did
And
not know that. I knew that cats would go out because they're going after rodents as well. I mean, they're killing a lot of non-rodents, a lot of your snakes and skinks and amphibians. They're really hard on those species. But if they catch a ground squirrel, like in California, it was a guy's cat brought it to him. The cat was probably out with ground squirrels, got a flea, and then maybe the flea got it. But you're saying I haven't heard the pneumonic plague, so everyone just plague comes in three different forms. Primarily, it's classified by how it is spread. So you have most of it's the bubonic, where you get flea bite, and that bacteria enters your body through the skin, and then it gets into your lymph glands, and that's where your body's trying to fight this bacterial infection, and it creates this large mass. That's the bubo. It's like a tumor that's sticking out of your body. That's the bubonic. But then what he mentioned here was the pneumonic plague, which is spread by droplets. So if you cough, then the bacteria is spread by the droplets. And he's saying the cat can spread pneumonic plague, and I have not heard that, which is quite scary.
yeah, and another disease. I can think of one more because I brought a guy across the street from me home from the.
Yeah, so it may have been pneumonic. And then you have another form which is spread by fluids, I believe, and that's obviously much rarer. So at minimum, the cat can bring fleas home to you. And so I tell people, look, if the cat's out roaming around, whatever's out there in the wild can be brought home to you while you're petting it and letting it sleep in your bed. So
that makes me think of one other disease. Another disease that you get off of fleas, and I brought a guy home from the hospital just across the street from me because he got himself a kitten, and he loved this kitten, but he was living a kind of a lifestyle in this house where he wasn't really supposed to be in there. He didn't have a sewer hookup, so he's kind of a squatter.
Oh, okay.
Or the guy who was renting to him there was kind of a slumlord there, but you know, he had this kitten in the house, and he was doing some unconventional things to keep his food good until he you know, felt like eating it, but he would leave mashed potatoes on this tabletop, and there were fleas all over his domicile there, and some of them jumped into his mashed potatoes and looked like pepper, you know. And they're on the fleas, there's these tapeworm eggs.
Oh,
and
gosh.
Humans can get the tapeworms, and I wound up having to bring this poor guy home from the hospital one time, and I told them, look for feline tapeworms because I know what's happening to his mashed potatoes. He's getting those fleas in his mashed potatoes. He wound up with a ravenous appetite, just a ravenous appetite, had to eat, and they found it. Sure enough, they found it at the hospital. His stepdaughter told me.
Gosh.
And this is just across the street from me. And this guy, I was talking about feeding next to the grocery store. There was a children's playground just on the other side of the undeveloped lot right there. There's another playground behind the other grocery store where he had another colony. And what he finally got arrested for trespassing, that wasn't enough for him. He decided he was going to trespass on the public elementary school grounds instead of just the parochial school where he was giving all the Catholic kids, you know, presumably diseases because they had sand in their playground.
Right.
And so he trespassed onto the public school that was right near my house because he just had to bring his cats up against every children's playground. And when he wrote his editorials, he would talk about how if he trapped too many of his cats, that the kids weren't going to have cats to play with and stuff. So he had these obsessive thoughts about, you know, his cats coming into contact with, you know, kids who happen to be immunologically naive to toxoplasmosis, most likely. I mean, it was
Right.
like everything he did and everything he advocated was, I say it like this: he was a cat lover second, and he was a infected feces distribution specialist first. When you really analyzed his behavior and try to think of why he would possibly be doing this, because his cats weren't meeting any kind of humane outcome at all. If he
Right.
had 6 cats in a colony or he had 60 cats in a colony, they had patches of fur missing. They looked awful, and they all looked the same. And one time he left the food that he was feeding them, the wet food, and it was sliced up hot dog slices, and I smelled it, and it smelled suspiciously like garlic. And so I researched that online, and some people apparently believe that garlic will keep fleas off of cats. But
Oh my gosh.
when you really do your homework, you find out that garlic and onions and everything like it will give a form of leukemia. No, anemia. It will give a form of anemia to dogs and cats. So they don't
Oh,
get
wow.
garlic and onions. But
Well, I think that my theory is a little bit different. I mean, you're talking about some of the disease factors that maybe the infection with the toxoplasmosis parasite is causing some of these behavior change. I guess my theory is a little bit more psychological and sociological in the sense that, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're mutually exclusive, right? It can be more than one option, but I just see that a lot of these people that tend to get so fanatic about cats or animals is because of a crushing loneliness in their life. And this is their way of trying to find meaning, and they invest all of their social energy into an animal they think loves them back. And so I look at it as a sadness that, and I can't deny the potential of a disease factor. I mean, we're still learning about some of this stuff. We don't know, but I think at minimum, I just see that these individuals, and they typically tend to be older. They tend to be alone, and their kids aren't with them, or there's some sort of social estrangement. What do you think about that as an option?
that could be it. Although I believe I've seen people kind of withdraw, and then get into cats. I mean, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I had one friend whose life was consumed by them, and I kind of watched that, and that's one of the things that made me more passionate about catching them, because I felt that she'd been infected by something infectious, and that I felt that cats were like some kind of agent by which people are withdrawing.
I gotcha. So the question that I would have is whether that individual suffered a social trauma, maybe a hard breakup with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or had someone hurt them very deeply that caused that withdrawal. But you're thinking that the cat is the effect, where the cat disease is the cause rather than the effect, the reaction to that break.
I think possibly, yeah, because one disease, they say, one mental health disorder, they say, occurs with toxoplasmosis more frequently with toxoplasmosis positive people is bipolar disorder. And I, like the stepdaughter of the man who got the tapeworms in his gut, actually had the guy next to the grocery store throwing food in her backyard when she was a kid, attracting the cats into her backyard. And she had, when I met her, she had bipolar disorder. And everybody who lived in houses around this guy's house on the next block seemed to be affected that way. There seemed to be like a mental health cluster around the guy's house.
So let's talk a little bit about how does someone become infected with toxoplasmosis, because we haven't mentioned that yet. So how does someone get this parasite?
It's scary easy. It's scary easy. And the fact that it has already caught on with some of the cat people that toxoplasma is a disease that it's an organism that possibly forces people to love cats, or at least one of the cat people, the lady who I knew whose life was consumed by cats, she knew this. And she spoke romantically in my communications with her about how toxoplasmosis forces people to love cats. And she likened it to this one character on Deep Space Nine who had like a parasite living in their belly that they were in constant communication with and stuff like that.
Gosh, okay.
She was into science fiction.
Wow.
She was into science fiction, which I appreciated that much about her. But
so how do people contract it? How do they get the disease inside of them?
Well, it's the cat excretes it in the feces, and it has to, about a day later, after the cat excretes the feces. I took biology, by the way. I never introduced myself that way, but I did. And a day later, the oocytes, the toxoplasma oocytes in the feces become active and can infect about 1 day after. So if you clean your cat's litter box within 24 hours, you shouldn't be in any danger from it. Mm-hmm. But after that 24 hours, and especially after the cat feces dries and has all that its cat hair in its composition and becomes crushed in any way, if you were to crush dry cat feces, you could just see the dust coming up off it if you get closer than you should ever get, to it. But it breaks down and goes into the soil. Like in about 6 weeks, you can't tell where the cat went to the bathroom, even if it went on the surface or whether it buried it slightly. You can't find the feces. It's disintegrating into the environment. But the oocytes from the toxoplasma remains active for 18 months later, according to studies, in most environments. Environments that are favorable anyway, not too dry, and not too wet. Okay. But
do you have to eat it? Or can you inhale it?
No, it's not like that at all. I mean, if cats go to the bathroom in grass and you've got powdered cat feces in the grass, a lawnmower can pick it up and spew it into the air. There's many ways it can get aerosolized. Okay. And even just solar heating on dirt can cause particles to lift up off the dirt, like the size of those toxoplasma oocytes. Okay. I worry about the flies too, the gnats that breed in the feces, and they hatch out of it. And then they land on everybody. They land on you and bite you. So, it's there's all kinds of ways to get contaminated that way. And lettuce. They keep having E. coli scares in lettuce, but I do believe they're saying E. coli when it's other organisms, and they're saying E. coli as a catch-all for other organisms because they do that with drinking water too. They say, oh, E. coli turned up in the water, and it's indicative.
It is a diagnostic. Yeah, it is a diagnostic test. So where it talks about other potential contaminants, but they focus on that could be. Yeah, that could very well be. So where would someone find more information on toxoplasmosis? Where would you suggest they go look?
There's actually a couple of good videos on YouTube. Okay. And then there's a Canadian equivalent of the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. The Canadians have an equivalent agency, and they publish what's called a pathogen safety data sheet. And they published one on toxoplasmosis, and it goes into great detail. And I believe they talk about how it gets onto fruit as well, because when it gets into dust that blows on the wind, it tends to settle on the outside of fruit. And when people pick a piece of fruit and bite into it without washing it first, I had a coworker who tried something called a hog plum here locally, and he said it gave him diarrhea and gave him headaches. And I told him what he probably had on that occasion, and that coworker had some strange behavior too. I wound up having to leave that workplace because of that coworker, even though I told him, hey, you could be under the influence of something you got infected with, because it goes into your brain and stays there, and it changes your behavior in whatever way, if it causes any behavior changes, they're permanent. They're permanent unless.
Unless we find a cure, which we haven't found a cure yet, have we?
No, they are investigating drugs that can suppress the activity of the cysts that get in the central nervous system, which are called bradyzoids. That's the life stage called the bradyzoid life stage. That's also the life stage that gets into beef when you get it from eating undercooked toxoplasmosis from eating undercooked meat. It's not because cows spread toxoplasmosis like cats do. It's because they get infected when their grazing areas are contaminated, and then they swallow it, and they get it just like a person, where the parasite doesn't breed sexually in their gut, but it burrows into their muscles and lodges in all their muscles and does some asexual reproduction in order to thoroughly lodge in all their muscles and get in great numbers. And that's how you get it from eating meat. Like one of the cat people's favorite things to say is, oh, you get toxoplasmosis from eating beef and cats have nothing to do with it. But cats have everything to do with it. They're the ones that contaminate the feeding grounds with their feces.
Well,
and they're the ones that
given the fact that most ranching communities have barn cats, they're around, and I keep hearing stories all the time from people. Well, we have barn cats, and they keep the mice down, and they. I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. It's one of those things. It's like trying to push back at a wave. And my understanding is that most people in Europe contract their toxoplasmosis through there because it's very common to undercook beef in Europe. My understanding is.
Yeah, I imagine it is. I mean, that's cats are they're not native anywhere in the form that we've bred them into, but Europe used to have wild cats, and so it's not completely foreign to their environment. But of course, this is like an invasive characteristic that has been bred into the cats. It just makes people want to have them around, want to pet them, want to feed them, and subsidize their presence in the environment, basically, so that there's many more of them than there would ever be of a natural predator. Like, there's a few predators actually that do that. They get a hold of garbage and they get a hold of pet food that people leave out and accessible, and they just proliferate out of control. Like raccoons do that, and
sure.
They have some of the same effect as too many as cats have, because
sure.
Well,
thank you very much for spending some time with us on the Pest Geek podcast, Living the Wildlife. So I'm going to sort of close out here. And hey, everybody, we want to thank Mr. Smith for participating with us here and talking about cats. If you are looking to get into cat control work, do your homework, find out what the laws are, make sure you have a plan before you begin controlling, make sure you have confirmation that the cats you're capturing, whether they're owned or truly feral as opposed to just allegedly feral. Make sure that you are following all of the humane standards, because the scrutiny on cats as a domestic species is enormous, and there are what I call the cat mafia. There are these individuals who are just enamored with cats and are extraordinarily politically active. You don't want to be in the crosshairs of that and have the liability of that type of work. So definitely try to be discreet, be professional, act in the best conditions, make sure you're checking your traps regularly according to the law. And I would say even if being more aggressive on that side, if you can do it more than once a day, you might want to consider doing that. Make sure you have permission to do the property. There's a lot of different steps to go through. Protect yourself. Make sure you're following all types of protocols to make sure you're not being exposed to cat feces. And if you are, make sure you're cleaning properly and you're making sure you're washing properly. And you might want to make sure you're flaming your traps to make sure before you're using them somewhere else, because you might be transmitting some things elsewhere. We've talked about flaming traps here before. Well, Mr. Smith, we want to thank you very much for being with us here in the Pest Geek podcast, and we hope that you do become a vertebrate controller down there. If you need additional help, do reach out to me. We'll help you get some information to make sure you get started on the right track. Hey, everybody out in Pest Geek land, we'd love to hear from you. You can contact me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you, get your feedback. Do you have topics that you're interested in? And we are also looking for advertisers for the Living the Wildlife podcast. If you have a product, a trap, a tool that would be useful for people in the vertebrate pest world or the Pest Geek world, definitely reach out to me again, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. And we're also looking for individuals who are interested in joining us and being an interview for our podcast. Definitely reach out to me. I would love to hear from you and talk to you more. We're pretty painless here at the Living the Wildlife podcast. Well, Mr. Smith, thank you very much, and we'll say goodbye to everybody.
All right.
Be safe.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.